follows. One, the creation of a distinct cabinet-level Department of Education would have a salutary impact on all who are involved in education, particularly parents, teachers, and students. The very innovation of upgrading the status of education from that of an adjunct to or division of another national agency would pointedly underscore its proper place among the nation's priorities. Look how prescient the Rebbe was, and what he might say if he was alive today. Number two, the workshops of education are the school and the home. For various reasons which need not be discussed, I'm worried about the home, he basically says. Too much of school is left to the streets. Insofar as the street is concerned, there is very little that we can do as things stand. More can be done and needs to be done. But in the final analysis, it's the public school where the greatest improvement can and must be achieved. Among the factors that lie in the roots of the shortcomings of public education, two, in my opinion, command primary attention. One has to do with the general curriculum, which should place much greater emphasis on character building and moral and ethical values. The other has to do with the quality of teaching by qualified, dedicated, motivating teachers. The latter point requires the upgrading of teachers' salaries on par with comparable professions in other fields of science and relieving them as far as possible of other frustrations and stresses. I just want to do a side note here. I'm a big believer that we should slash public school professionals' tax rates. We need the best minds coming into the profession. Why not, as a country, to say, if you're going to take a job as a teacher, which unfortunately pays too low in our country, let's do that. Instead of, again, giving these massive tax cuts disproportionately to the wealthiest in our country. The upgrading of our nation's educational system will, of course, require considerable federal investment. But this is one area where spending has built-in returns, not only in the long term, but also in the immediate gains in terms of diminishing expenditures in the penal system, crime prevention, reduction of vandalism, drug abuse. In the longer term, it would also bring savings in expenditure on health and welfare, and one may venture to say even in the defense budget, since a morally healthy, strong, and united nation is in itself a strong deterrent against any enemy. And finally, 5, he says, the creation of a separate cabinet-level Department of Education, as I understand it, has been conceived not for the purpose of merely improving administrative efficiency, nor merely as a coordinator of existing programs, or for technical reasons. The main purpose is to breathe new life into the whole educational system of this nation and to involve the whole nation through its federal government in this massive concerted effort. As such, I am convinced a National Department of Education, cabinet level, deserves everybody's support. Thank you, Lubavitcher Rebbe. Unfortunately, this administration is not listening to the Rebbes. What does the Department of Education do, and how is this administration attacking it? Let me read you an excerpt from the New York Times. Can Trump abolish the Department of Education? ? It's from March 20th. President Trump signed an executive order on Thursday that directs the Federal Department of Education to come up with a plan for its own demise. Only Congress can abolish a cabinet-level agency, and it is not clear whether Mr. Trump has the votes in Congress to do so. I will tell you, in the Senate, if you need 60 votes, he doesn't. But he's already begun to dismantle the department, firing about half of its staff, gutting its respected education research arm, and vastly narrowing the focus of its civil rights division, which works to protect students from discrimination. Mr. Trump's long history of attacking the Department of Education represents a revival of a Reagan-era Republican talking point. It has unified Democrats in fiery opposition, but is shuttering the department possible, and if not, how has Trump begun to use the agency to achieve his policy goals? What does the department do? Founded in 1979, its main job is distributing money to college students through grants and loans. It also sends federal money to K-12 schools targeted towards low-income and disabled students and enforces anti-discrimination laws. The money for schools has been set aside by Congress and is unlikely to be affected by Mr. Trump's executive order. I don't agree with the New York Times because time and time again, the money set aside by Congress is being clawed back by the president against the people that the Constitution of the United States of America says has spending power. The federal dollars account for only about 10% of K-12 school funding nationwide. While Mr. Trump has said he wants to return power over education to the states, states and school districts already control K-12 education, which is mostly paid for with state and local tax dollars. The federal department does not control learning standards or reading lists in countries. The agency plays a big role in funding and disseminating research on education, but those efforts have been significantly scaled back by the Trump administration. It also administers tests that track whether American students are learning and how they compare with their peers in other states and countries. God forbid we measure people's performance. It's unclear whether those tests will continue to be delivered, given the drastic reductions in the staff and funding necessary to management. Still, closing the department would not likely have much of an immediate effect on how schools and colleges operate. The Trump administration has discussed tapping the Treasury Department to disperse student loans and grants, for instance, and the Health and Human Services to administer funding with students with disabilities. Any effort to fully eliminate the department would have to go through Congress. Republican members would most likely hear opposition from superintendents, college presidents, and other education leaders in school districts. Schools in Republican regions rely on federal aid from the agency just as schools in Democratic regions do. They're going to run into opposition, said Joe Vallant, an education expert at the Brookings Institution. They have a laser-thin majority and a filibuster to confront in the Senate. Even if congressional Republicans stuck together, Dr. Valiant predicts their constituents would protest, given the department's role in distributing money from programs like Pell Grants, which pay for college tuition, and IDEA, which provides support to students with disabilities. It's a very hard sell. I'm skeptical. Efforts to eliminate the department threaten the enforcement of critical laws. There's the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which has supported school districts since 1965 in low-income areas. Individuals with Disabilities Act, which ensures 7.5 million students with disabilities receive an education. The Higher Education Act, which helps more students afford college. Title IX protections to guard against sex discrimination. This doesn't just hurt our country, but undermining those resources for our students hurts generations to come. I want to submit for the record a New York Times article entitled "Trump Firings Gut Education Department Civil Rights Division." Thank you, my friend. Thank you, presiding officer, sir. How education department cuts could hurt low-income and rural schools in particular. An article on March 21st, 2025. May I submit that too, sir? Again, rural communities are really taking a hit. And if I can give disability rights testimonials. Gutting the Department of Education will be devastating for students with disabilities. Right now, the Department of Education, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which guarantees more than 7 million students in America the right to a free, appropriate public education. It ensures that provides services like speech therapies, counseling, personalized learning plans. Without federal oversight, these protections could disappear. Schools could delay evaluations, cut corners, or deny support altogether for parents. Consider Catherine, a resident of Westwood, New Jersey, right by Harrington Park, where I grew up. Catherine has 7-year-old twin boys who receive special services. They currently attend an out-of-school district specialized program, but are very much a part of Westwood Regional School District, and may even one day transition back into the school. In her words, the Department of Education plays a critical role in enforcing the IDEA and ensuring that students with disabilities receive the accommodations and support they need to succeed. Without this oversight, many students risk losing essential services, widening existing gaps and disparities, and they will face greater barriers to academic success and reaching their highest potential. This is not a partisan issue. It's a matter of ensuring that all students, regardless of ability, have equal access to education. Her story is one of thousands of parents, educators, and advocates across the country who are standing up for children's rights to an equitable education. For Catherine's families, for her boys, and for every child who deserves a fair shot at success. Their fight for an inclusive education is essential. Here's Ashley from Wayne, New Jersey, who knows firsthand how important the Department of Education's funding is. Her daughter, who's legally blind, relies on Bookshare, an online learning tool that provides accessible materials to students with print disabilities at no cost to schools or families. Without it, her daughter would be left behind. As Ashley put it, this is a service she absolutely needs in order to access information that regularly sighted people do not even have to think about. Cutting programs like this isn't just irresponsible, it would be cruel. Kimberly from Dumont, New Jersey, the mother of twin boys with nonverbal level 3 autism. They attend an amazing school in Nutley because of IDEA. Without it, their future would be uncertain. In her own words, she says, quote, "It was not long ago that kids like them would have had to have been institutionalized. Now they are able to have a beautiful life and go to school. I am terrified of the future if IDEA is eliminated. I am begging you, please consider families like mine." Kimberly, I see you. Michelle from New Jersey shares this fear. Her daughter, who has neurofibromatosis, and has apraxia, depends on in-class support to succeed. She knows firsthand how essential the Department of Education is in protecting students with disabilities. This is her words now, quite, quote, "Gutting, weakening, and ultimately closing the Department of Education is disastrous and dangerous for the disabled students who depend upon it." She reminds us that education is a civil right, and laws like IDEA and Section 504 ensure that students with disabilities receive the support they need to succeed. Alana from my state is deeply concerned about her 20-year-old son who depends on the protections of Section 504 to have a fair shot at the future. Her 10-year-old child with autism relies on these protections every single day. She is asking for help because, as she put it, Section 504 and its rules are very important to the disability community. We need your help to save it. Roger, who's a grandfather from New Jersey, is also pleading for action. His granddaughter has relied on a 504 plan since 7th grade and will continue to need it as she applies to college. He raises the essential question, which programs are directly helping students? The answer is clear. Laws like IDEA, IEPs, and Section 504, they're not luxuries, they're lifelines. Again, this is not about politics, and as we see from various writings, people from both sides of the aisle are worried and concerned. I'd like to submit for the record this article from one of the publications in my state, What Happens to Special Education Programs in New Jersey if Trump Shuts Down the Department of Education. It's by Gene Myers.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. I want to say something about student loans, too. The Department of Education is also responsible for operating the $1.6 trillion student federal loan program, which benefits 42.7 million borrowers in America and allows students to access higher education, something that is shown unequivocally to strengthen our economy. This administration plans to move student loan funding to the Small Business Administration, a plan that even some of my Republican colleagues in Congress have expressed serious concerns about. Here's an article that Republicans are hesitant to stand behind Trump's plan for student loans. Although SBA managed a wealth of COVID relief programs, it normally runs a much smaller operation than the student debt program. President Trump has yet to win over his own party to push immediately, in quotes, transfer of the Department of Education's massive student loan operation to another agency that's slated for deep staff cuts. Trump was expected to propose moving the agency's $1.6 trillion portfolio to the Treasury Department, a concept long discussed on Capitol Hill and suggested in Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's conservative policy blueprint. Instead, the president announced this month that the SBA would get it, surprising many lawmakers and conservatives who track the issue. Although the SBA which provides financial support to companies for disaster relief, training, and other needs, managed a wealth of COVID relief programs that normally runs a much smaller operation than student debt. It's also slated to lose 43% of its staff. Now Republicans are worried about the size of the debt and the staffing needed to manage the complex system of service borrowers and loan applications. And with about 43 million borrowers and a record number of them starting to fall behind on their payments since the pandemic-era hiatus ended in 2023, transferring this work may be one of the most challenging hurdles for unwinding the agency President Trump has pledged to close. A lot of us were thinking it would go to Treasury. We're talking about the huge nature of student loans, House Education and Workforce Chair Tim Walberg said in an interview. They have much larger staffing capabilities right now than SBA, but the president may have something specific in mind that I'm not aware of. Early legislation from Senator Mike Rounds aimed at dismantling the Education Department also recommended the Treasury Department for the job. At a recent House Rules Committee meeting, Walberg suggested that moving the portfolio to the SBA, which likely requires an act of Congress to complete, might not be permanent. Some Republican lawmakers have been hesitant to say the move is official. Neither the Education Department's Federal Aid Office, which manages the loan program, nor the SBA have provided a timeline or detailed plans to move the portfolio, but Education Department officials, skeptical of Trump's SBA plan, met the week after his announcement to discuss if the Treasury Department should manage this massive portfolio instead of the SBA, according to a person who was granted anonymity to discuss the matter. Some conservatives are concerned about the SBA's lack of experience with colleges and universities and the time crunch and staff will be under to learn the complex student loan system. The plan to move the portfolio sounds rushed. It sounds like no one has been briefed on it, and it's not clear what the purpose is, said Jason Delsey, who served on the Education Department's review group on Trump's presidential transition team. FSA largely works with direct loans, meaning that instead of a bank lending the money, the Education Department disperses the funds directly to institutions in the students' names. Colleges and universities, however, aren't on the hook if the loan isn't repaid. The borrower is. The SBA only started working with direct loans at a massive scale in the aftermath of the pandemic. They're laying off 43% of the SBA staff at the same time. SBA is being handed $1.6 trillion portfolio. That's 3 times the size of what they have, and they're laying off 43% of the staff, said Michael Negron, who worked on the small business and student loans for the National Economic Council during the Biden administration. The administration has not clearly stated whether the FSA workers who have expertise on the student debt system would be transferred to the SBA, which is concern for Negron. That doesn't mean it's impossible. The SBA could be a fit, he said, but the conditions need to be right. There is a world where this can work, he said optimistically, who is now a fellow at Groundwork Collaborative, a left-leaning think tank. The White House did not acknowledge questions about how it would transfer. President Trump is doing everything he can within his executive authority to dismantle the Department of Education and return education back to the states while safeguarding critical functions for students and families, said Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt in a statement. The president has always said Congress has a role to play in this effort, and we expect them to help the president deliver. You know, that sounds like a president who doesn't care about Congress, cares about what he's trying to do, hasn't approached this in an intelligent way, making grand statements and opinions without not considering that the department you're transferring loans to might actually be incapable with a severely diminished staff of doing the job. Here's an incredible article by Fareed Zakaria about what this is really going on and how it affects the United States, especially relative to other nations. There is no area in which the United States' global dominance is more total than higher education. With about 4% of the world's population and 25% of its gross domestic product, America has 72% of the world's top 25 universities by one ranking. and 64% by another. But this crucial U.S. competitive advantage is being undermined by the Trump administration's war on colleges. Hat tip to the New York Times' Michelle Goldberg for raising this issue as well. We have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country. The professors are the enemy, said J.D. Vance during a speech to the National Conservatism Conference in 2021. The administration has put those words into action. The most dramatic assaults have been financial, a freezing or massive reduction in research grants and loans from the federal government. Some of these efforts are under court review, but the cumulative impact could be that billions of dollars in cuts to basic research, much of it's disrupting ongoing projects and programs. High-quality research in the United States has emerged in a unique ecosystem. The federal government provides much of the funding through prominent institutions such as the National Institute of Health and the National Science Foundation. Private foundations and companies account for the most of the rest. Professors at universities, both public and private, use these funds to conduct research. No other country has a system that works as well. What is risk now is what Holden Thorpe, the editor-in-chief of Science, family of journalists, calls the social contract that the federal government institutions have had to enable the scientific research enterprise in America in the last 80 years. That is what is at risk. Take Duke University, which ranked number 11 in total grants received from the NIH last year. Of its $1.33 billion research budget, $863 million came from Washington, according to the AP. That includes funds for critical research projects on cancer and other diseases, but also supports more than 630 PhD students at the medical school. If the cuts go through, these projects and students will have to be pared back substantially. Just on Thursday, Johns Hopkins announced huge layoffs, saying it would let go of more than 2,000 employees after losing $800 million in federal grants. One crucial mechanism to cut funding is through a massive reduction in the overhead or indirect costs that universities get reimbursed for by the federal government. Overhead makes up 40 or 50% of a grant. But last month, the NIH ordered that it be capped at 15%. That sounds more rational than it is. Universities divide their costs on science grants into research costs, the salaries of the professors and graduate students, and overhead, the costs of the buildings, labs, energy, and utilities and administrative staffs. When you are building a complex lab to conduct experiments, the structure and equipment is often far more costly than the salaries and stipends of the researchers. Michigan State University has declared that these cuts could make it stop construction of a $330 million research building for cancer research, for cardiovascular disease, and neuroscience studies. Government funding plays a unique role in America. It often supports basic research, the kind that companies have less incentive to do. And its results cannot be hoarded by any one company, but rather are provided free to the entire scientific community, to the entire technological community, so that all can use it to experiment and innovate. It's an incredible American system that has reaped billions and billions of dollars of rewards to our economy. Take the mapping of the human genome. It cost less than $3 billion and took 13 years because it was government funded. One of its key requirements was that the research should be made publicly available for all within 24 hours of being generated. The other assault on the universities is a strange new attack on free speech for read writes. It began from a principled critique that bureaucracies, universities, and elites all became too woke. But the government response to this problem has been Orwellian, searching through these institutions for any mentions of the words diversity or identity or inclusion, and then shutting down those programs without any review. Worse, it now punishes universities on their campuses, people who might espouse certain views on topics like Israel and Palestine, and now is punishing the protesters themselves. I have long argued that universities have a huge problem. They have far too little intellectual and ideological diversity, which is the most important kind of diversity on a campus. But the way you fix that is not to restrict radical left-wing speech, but to add voices and views from other parts of the spectrum. The answer to censorship by the left is not censorship by the right. The fury with which the Trump administration has turned on academia resembles nothing so much as the early days of the Cultural Revolution, when an increasingly paranoid Mao Zedong smashed China's universities, their established universities, and a madness that took generations in China to remedy. Meanwhile, in Beijing last week, the Chinese government announced its intention to massively increase funding for research and technology so that it could lead the world in science in the 21st century. So as America appears to be copying the worst aspects of Chinese history, China is copying the best aspect of America's, striving to take the edge away from the United States as though we are going through our own cultural revolution. Learn from the fascist in China. Fareed's article's over. This is me now. Learn from the fascists in China and don't do what the Chinese did. Do what America has done to lead humanity in the sciences, in innovation, in research, in breakthroughs, in science. We are the global model, and one administration in 71 days has our best universities cutting the number of PhD students they bring in, cutting the research that they're doing, cutting the planned development of research buildings. This is insanity. Insanity. We are America. Why is the President of the United States attacking the science and research at the top universities on the planet Earth, bullying them, undermining them? I've had universities from my state. I've had universities from my neighboring state, not Connecticut, New York. I've had my college, Stanford, come to see me, top researchers. The academic community, not the political community, not the history majors, not the political scientists, not the literature students, not the AFAM departments. The scientists of America have been coming to the Senate to say, what the heck? What is going on? How could you take America's edge, America's advantage, America's strength, America's brilliance, and undercut it in 71 days of your administration? We are killing the golden goose. Why? Because we have a president who is taking money that we already approved, the Article 1 branch of government, and claiming that he could claw it back, all on some trumped-up charge that these institutions are too woke. The solution to that is not to cut science funding. This should make people mad, but more importantly, it should make people stand up and not be bystanders and wait until we lose our edge because our adversaries globally are smiling as we destroy our institutions from Duke to Rutgers to University of Michigan to Berkeley to Stanford. This is madness. This is insanity. And one of a dozen reasons we're going through, a dozen reasons I'm standing here, that we should not be doing things normal. If we are complicit in what Donald Trump is doing, I'm hearing it not from political people, but from scientists that show up in my office, from Cornell, medical researchers that show up in my office from our research hospitals in New Jersey and are saying, they're not political, they're just saying, what the heck? You are undermining the research of today that will affect the breakthroughs 5 years from now, 10 years from now. What's China doing while we're doing this? They're investing. Record numbers, record levels. The country of Tiananmen Square cracking down on college students is now trying to out America, while America is acting more like them because our president is violating the separation of powers, taking away the money we approved. And we're letting it happen by doing things normally here and not holding one hearing. Here's another example of what Fareed was talking about. It's an article entitled, Graduate Student Admissions Paused. Graduate student admissions paused and cut back as universities react to the Trump orders on research. And again, this is not from a political magazine. It's not from the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. This is from Stat News. When did science become political? Acceptances for biomedical graduate students and professional scholars are being cut back at some universities and medical centers across the country as many grapple with the potential impact of the Trump administration's order to cut National Institute of Health research funding. That paragraph alone should have people all in this chamber upset. Let's just give European universities, Australian universities, Canadian universities, Chinese universities a leg up because we're going to cut the number of graduate students and postdoctoral students. The geniuses in our country will have less opportunity. Here goes the article, it continues. The cuts come even as the proposed reductions to funding for overhead expenses set to start on February 10th were temporarily halted last week by federal judges, at least until a court hearing. Universities appear to be exercising caution, with some freezing positions and not taking new applications or accepting fewer students than normal, according to interviews, public announcements, and internal emails obtained by STAT. The abrupt narrowing of training opportunities is leaving many future researchers at the start of their scientific journey in limbo. The academic calendar runs to the rhythm of its own sessions right now. It's typically this time of year when offer letters for PhD programs and postdoc positions in labs start hitting inboxes. Universities and academic medical centers were in the thick of that process when the NIH, under President Donald Trump, put out a policy about overhead costs known as indirect costs. This couldn't be worse timing for doing this. Waverly Ding, an associate professor at the University of Maryland who studies the biomedical sciences workforce, is creating a jolt in the market that is going to be disabling for labs, especially the smaller labs, because they won't have the human capital to do their science. It's also going to create chaos for PhDs. It's going to be a cascading chain effect to the entire ecosystem. I know we don't read science. Actually, we have a few doctors in here that do. But look at the alarm that they're sounding that this is not normal. The slowdown is happening at some universities and not at others. Some students may be unaware of the issue as they anxiously await acceptance letters without fully understanding the role national politics is playing in those decisions. Some faculty are grappling with admissions that are paused and then unpause, while others say they are receiving little information or guidance from leadership. At the University of Southern California, and as a former Stanford football player, it's hard for me to talk about USC. I had to jab them, Senator Murphy. At the University of Southern California, faculty in some departments were told last week to pause admissions and not formalize offers to students, even those who had visited and been given verbal acceptances. The awkward part is that we are already told these applicants that they were provisionally accepted and invited them to an in-person recruitment day. Many have already purchased a flight and made hotel reservations. I mean, that is just cruel. One professor said in a faculty discussion listserv observed by STAT, I know Senator Murphy hangs out in faculty discussion listservs, that pause on admissions in psychology was lifted this week, STAT was told. Jennifer Unger, a professor who runs a doctoral program in health behavioral research in the Department of Population and Public Health Sciences at the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine, said Wednesday she was still not able to admit the 6 graduate students for her department that had been accepted after a visit day on February 3rd. We had flown them out. We told them, we love you. We want to admit you. And then everything just stopped, Unger said. On the day Donald Trump announced they were cutting indirect costs, USC paused all PhD admissions. I just don't know what to tell them, Unger said to the students. Some of them have their offers and will likely go somewhere else. We've probably lost them. Despite USC's unpausing of all admissions in many departments, Unger said Wednesday she was still not able to admit students. She hoped her portal of admit students would open soon, but said this disruption was coming at a time when her field, public health, was already reeling from the actions of the Trump administration, something affecting potential graduate students as well. It's very stressful for them. This is a major life decision, she said. Adding, they were already worried about their futures. They were asking, quote, do you think we'll be able to get jobs in this environment? Do you think we'll get grants? The dean of the graduate school at USC told STAT late Friday that the universities briefly paused PhD admissions to assess the uncertainties around federal funding, but that the admissions process was now open. Some schools, though, were continuing to accept students or had accepted graduate students before the recent turmoil and said that offers were there intact. We have no knowledge of any disruptions to graduate student admissions in the science fields, Rachel Zentz, Senior Director of Communications, said. In some cases, the pauses in hirings and admissions were implemented ahead of the NIH policy change. Evidence of how quickly the Trump administration's threats to withhold federal research dollars over diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are shifting the financial footings of universities. On February 6th, faculty at Vanderbilt University were instructed to reduce graduate admissions by half across the board, according to an email obtained by STAT. Reduce graduate admissions by half. On the same day, the faculty at the University of Washington School of Public Health received an email to pause offers to doctoral students, as well as offers of financial support to graduate students. Faculty hiring was also frozen, the email said. This Tuesday, the public health school sent out another email informing the community that some faculty hiring and PhD students would continue, some, but at a greatly diminished level. The school is also planning to take more cost containment measures, including a hiring freeze, a reappointment freeze, through the end of the academic year, due to the volatility caused by the Trump administration. Existing offers will be honored, wrote Hillary Goodwin, Dean of the University of Washington School of Public Health. Marion Pepper, chair of UW's immunology department said she was instructed by the university leadership to keep her program's next generation cohort smaller than the usual 5 to 9 students admitted each year. That's easier said than done, because the proportion of students who accept offers of admissions varies years to year. Pepper told STAT that while she expects the incoming class to be slightly smaller than usual, she has spoken with program heads at UW and elsewhere who are reducing class sizes by half or more. I know for other programs, they're feeling bleak about how they're going to keep labs running without funding or students, Pepper said. It's pretty overwhelming. Medical schools are hit hard. Medical research hit hard. It's unclear how many other universities are taking similar preemptive belt-tightening measures, but schools of public health and medical schools are particularly vulnerable because they tend to have many faculty postdocs and graduate students supported by grants. Boston University School of Public Health has also ordered an across-the-board hiring freeze on all new faculty and staff positions, including student workers and postdocs. In a campus-wide announcement, Dean ad interim Michael Stein said the move was being made due to the uncertainty of the moment. A spokesperson for the school told STAT that the graduate admissions are unaffected by the freeze. Unger said USC had cut funding for some teaching assistants in their department early in the year, before the executive orders, which would reduce the number of graduate students in her program from 10 to 6. On February 11th, Columbia's University Medical School faculty were told that the school was putting a temporary pause on hiring as well as other activities like travel and procuring equipment, according to an email obtained by the Columbia student newspaper, the Columbia Spectator. A spokesperson for Columbia declined to comment on the pause. In other cases, schools may accept fewer graduate students than they had planned, not because of an overt directive from university leaders, but because faculty feel unsure about the future given the Trump administration's intent to cut billions of dollars in overhead funding. At the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, 25% fewer graduate students will be admitted this year, 25% fewer, based on a survey of faculty members taking new students, said Mark Pilfer, a professor in cell biology there. That means the school will admit about 75 students across the biomedical sciences. He noted the number of graduate students vary each year, so the decline was not unprecedented as the numbers continue to go down. In an interview with STAT, Robert Farms, the director of UNC's Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center, said the hiring freezes, fewer PhD students, and other similar cost containment measures are being considered as the center is eyeing the same financially turbulent waters as other research institutions. Every one of these things is on the table, unfortunately, Ferris said. There's so much uncertainty. Can we hire this faculty member? Can we purchase this equipment? They just don't know exactly what or how many measures the center has to take, he said, as there are simply still too many unknowns. For instance, the outcome of the NIH indirect rate cut policy is still up in the air, not knowing how it's going to shake out. It just freezes everybody into inaction. Adding to the uncertainty is disruptions to key parts of the National Institute of Health approval process for proposed grants. Although some meetings of study sections in which grant applications are reviewed resumed at the start of the month, meetings of advisory councils have not. Each of the 27 institutes of the National Institute of Health have its own advisory council, which meets 3 times a year to issue final recommendations on new research projects. None of these councils, none, have met since January 22nd. Communications freezes were ordered across all health agencies. A law called the Federal Advisory Committee Act requires that advisory councils post meeting details in the Federal Register 15 days prior to their scheduled date. But because submissions to the Federal Register have been put on hold indefinitely, these meetings can't take place. And without these meetings, no new grants can be funded. According to one NIH employee, at least one NIH meeting scheduled for this Friday to allow an institute director to provide updates that could proceed because it has been posted to the Federal Register was nonetheless canceled Wednesday. This was because the meeting was specified it would include a session open to the public. But because a ban remains in place on any public communications, meetings with open sessions cannot be held. And they can't update the Federal Registry with a revised agenda stating no open session because the Federal Registry is closed. Principal investigators who had been counting on awards to pay the salaries of new graduate students and postdocs are now left wondering if their labs will be able to make it through the summer, let alone take on new members. Referencing the hold on submissions to the Federal Register, MIT neuroscientist Nancy Canwisher proposed on social media Wednesday, "So much for the grant I submitted last September, which was supposed to be reviewed last week. Hardly the biggest tragedy on the current scale of things, but it will force me to severely downsize my already small lab." Fears were similar for one computational genomics researcher at a prominent East Coast institution who asked for anonymity for fear of being targeted by the Trump administration. We have people coming to visit the lab next week, and these are students we haven't made offers to yet because we can't. I don't know what I'm going to tell them. Beyond the immediate harm to young scientists, he worries about the long-term damage to fields like computer science and biomedical engineering, areas where the U.S. has long been the world leader. If we stop training students, we're going to lose the lead very quickly, he said. It's not clear anyone else is going to pick up the ball. We're just going to be worse off and people won't even be aware of it. It's hard to notice when it takes 20 years instead of 10 to get a cure. Cuts within the NIH are also adding to the rapidly constricting pool of places prospective scientists can go and train. Since the 1960s, the NIH has provided opportunities for recent college graduates to spend 1 or 2 years in a full-time research position within one of the Institute's labs, which many scientists see as a key tool for recruiting young people into biomedical fields. On February 1st, a notice appeared on the NIH website announcing that all training programs had paused recruitment, pending guidance from Health and Human Services. The NIH post-bac program, which provides recent college graduates with research positions and career advising, and last year admitted roughly 1,600 people, will not be accepting any new applicants for 2025, according to an NIH employee who asked for anonymity for fear, of course, that's my ad, of repercussions. It's a vital link in the training of doctors and biomedical scientists in the country. The NIH employee said, "You can't find a medical school or a biomedical program that doesn't have students from the post-bac program." And it's ended. While the Trump administration may be hoping that the headwinds in creating for academic hiring may push recent graduates or newly minted PhDs into the private industry, it's unlikely to play out that way because of the speed and scale of the disruption. Pharmaceutical firms are not going to suddenly open up more jobs for graduates to adapt to this situation, said Ding. More likely is that people will start looking for opportunities outside the United States or wind up without jobs altogether. At this point, it's still too early to say if these are the first signs of losing a generation of scientists. But even people like Ding, who track the data that could provide clues about how extensive the damage will be, are facing uncertainty about their ability to continue their own work. Her plan to hire a postdoc are currently on hold as she waits to find out if a grant she has through the National Science Foundation, which is facing its own dramatic cuts, will come through. I mean, honestly, I'm here because I said at the beginning, some 9 hours ago, that I was going to stand here because what is going on in America is not normal. We've gone through healthcare cuts. We've gone through Social Security being attacked and undermined and slashed, Department of Education. But if those things don't worry you, statements like this should. It's still a little too early to say that